begin again in Copenhagen. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is promising the U.S. will work to provide significant funding to poor countries to fight climate change if a strong accord is reached at the climate talks.
The United States is prepared to work with other countries toward a goal of jointly mobilizing $100 billion a year by 2020 to address the climate change needs of developing countries.
Clinton said U.S. support hinges on agreements from developing economies to cut carbon gas emissions and on finding ways to verify that such cuts have been made. She made the announcement just as many top officials are expressing concerns they will not be able to hammer out a global warming treaty before U.S. President Barack Obama and more than 100 other world leaders arrive for the summit's conclusion on Friday.
Meanwhile, African countries have scaled back the amount of money they say will be necessary to cope with climate change. VOA's Paul Sisco has more.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, presenting a unified African position, called on developing nations to accept an immediate short-term finance plan of $10 billion a year from developed nations to help them manage climate change.
A demand that 40% of the startup fund be earmarked for Africa, and request that the fund allocated for Africa be administered by the African Development Bank under the Board of Trustees that I mentioned earlier.
Mr. Zenawi also addressed the other significant issue at the talks, the need to cut the emission of greenhouse gases.
Not only has Africa contributed virtually nothing to the current level of carbon emissions, but it is unlikely, under any scenario, to be a significant polluter in the future.
The Ethiopian Prime Minister called on developed nations to live up to their commitment for cutting emissions and helping developing countries. He says the least developed nations want $50 billion per annum by 2015 and will require $100 billion a year by 2020 to meet their climate change adaptation needs, provided developed nations also cut carbon emissions significantly. Paul Sisco, VOA News.